What is faith for you, dear listener? What does Christianity mean for you? Do you find yourself switching Christian mode on and off? We have to be aware of this separation, this compartmentalization, when Christianity becomes a mood, an event, or a behavior. Here's a quote by Dr. Edwin Ryan. Christianity is a world and life view, and not simply a series of unrelated doctrines. Christianity includes all of life. Every realm of knowledge, every aspect of life, and every facet of the universe find their place and their answer within Christianity. It is a system of truth enveloping the entire world in its grasp. I hope you find this true for yourself as well. It's Saturday, January 29th, 2022, and today, as usual, we are covering top stories, and the two featured stories of this week will be the Canada trucking protest and the worrying news surrounding the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Welcome to LifeRing, a podcast where we strive to provide you with a well-rounded review of what is going on in the world between Monday and Friday of this past week. My name is Alex, and joining me today is someone you might recognize if you've been with us since the beginning. Brother Paul Kazakov was one of the four people who helped us to get this project off the ground from an idea to reality. So, Paul, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Alex. Quite the introduction. It's good to be here. Yeah, it's weird because every time we used to record before, we'd have to drive to our studio and see each other in person. But now we're doing this virtually and remote. So definitely good to see the show building, getting more technically progressive. So I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you. I'm really enjoying, every time we go through like the sick phase, I guess every winter or so, right? You then come out on the other side much more appreciative of life, I feel. You're sort of just like, man, I could just do things normally and not have to feel like I'm dragging myself. Huh?
I could breathe it from both nostrils. You're like, man, what is this?
Yeah, so it's great.
It's good.
How's your family? How's your job?
It's been very busy recently. So I don't know if you know this, but we've just finished a remodel at home. Work has been busy, and then we're waiting on a son, right? And in a month. So very hectic, but very good times. So
wow. Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. Well, if you're new to this podcast, we have two featured stories that we kind of shifted, Paul. We changed a bit since the last time you were on. We have two featured stories that we choose to highlight any given week. One I get to share in the beginning, and then the second story is shared by my co-host or guest host, like Paul in this case, at the end of the podcast. In the middle of the episode, we have a section we call it Lightning Round, but it became kind of the main section, where we go through a dozen or so stories of current events that stood out in the news this past week and offer a brief commentary. So let's get to our first one of the two featured stories for this episode. So we talked about Canada last week, their C4 law regarding gender conversion therapy. Well, this weekend you probably got to see the culmination of trucking rally unlike any before. And by trucking rally, I mean that there's a bunch of trucks right now in Canada lined up. Here's the news story according to Associated Press. Several thousand people are expected in Ottawa as early as Friday as part of a group demanding an end to vaccine mandate and COVID-19 restrictions. Some of the group's leaders are calling for a peaceful event, but statements from some associated with the group have included threats of violence. So basically, it's a huge convoy of truckers going to converge in Ottawa, the capital city of Canada. And of course, the Canadian president dismissed it as a fringe group, but it seems like there are hundreds of thousands of people supporting this. It all began last Sunday, January 23rd. There were reports of hundreds of truckers leaving the Canadian province of British Columbia and going east to Ottawa. The reason behind this convergence is a response to the new law that came into effect on January 15th. And apparently this new law is requiring truckers entering Canada to be fully immunized against the coronavirus. Now, it was mentioned by Associated Press that the United States has imposed the same requirements of truckers entering that country, meaning Canada, I assume. So that's happening right now as we're recording this show, and I actually checked in, and it seems like they're steadily trickling in. But let me take a step back here. How are you feeling about 2022 so far. I mean, we're like, January 29th, date of recording. Mm-hmm. Has this pandemic been dragging for too long? What are your thoughts, man?
I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. If I were to look back at these 4 weeks in 2022, I feel like everything was overshadowed by like COVID. It seems like there was the vaccine mandates. Then there was the Supreme Court that blocked them recently. And then straight from there, it seemed like there was this, a week or maybe half a week period where there wasn't really anything big in the news. And then all of a sudden it's this trucking scandal from Canada coming with these vaccine mandates. So
yeah, they've been in the news because of their overreach lately. Actually, I feel like 2021 sort of have been highlighted. Remember the pastor situation, right? How they were shutting down churches and
yeah. The one pastor that got like put in prison 3 times now.
Right, and it's just ridiculous. And it seems like, again, those are isolated cases, but overall the country is just bending over under this oppression, if you will.
So I actually wonder, I'm wondering now, so if all the truckers are going to Ottawa, right? So that means all of these truckers, they'd be usually at work right now, right? They'd be like delivering
taking
stuff.
loads,
so
right?
Do you think Canada is going to have a supply shortage here pretty shortly?
That's a great question, right? I would assume that's probably going to affect, because you not only have like Canadian truckers there, these are also Americans who cross the border. I assume they probably can afford themselves a week off, right? Because they would usually have this. So they're like, all right, I guess my week off is going to be spent parked, in a freezing temperatures, somewhere up north and northeast in Canada. I don't know. Yeah. But yeah. And now there's this Facebook group called Convoy to Ottawa 2022 Restart. And I know that around 8 p.m. on Friday it was like 275,000. Let me check right now, because I think around midnight it was like 325,000. So what, 50K more people added in a span of like 4 hours. And as I'm looking at it right now, it's 375,000 people as of this morning, at 10 a.m. That's a lot of people supporting it. It seems like it's really drawing international attention. And you see like people posting videos from like other countries. They gathered like, together and they're supporting these truckers. It really caused a stir. Now, here's the kicker. It looks like they raised $7.9 million, close to $8 million. Let's see if it hit. Oh, it's $8 million. It's $8 million as of now. Now they do have a goal of $9 million Canadian dollars. Go ahead.
So what are they collecting money for? I'm confused. Well, I know it's to help the cause, but what exactly is it going to do?
So here's from their GoFundMe campaign. To our fellow Canadians, the time for political overreach is over. Our current government is implementing rules and mandates that are destroying the foundation of our businesses, industries, and livelihoods. Canadians have been integral to the fabric of humanity in many ways that have shaped the planet. We are a peaceful country that has helped protect nations across the globe from tyrannical government who oppress their people, and now it seems it's happening here. We're taking our fight to the doorsteps of our federal government and demanding that they seize all mandates against its people. Small businesses are being fundamental necessities to survive. It's our duty as Canadians to put an end to these mandates. It is imperative that this happens, because if we don't, our country will no longer be a country we have come to love. We are doing this for our future generations and to regain our lives back. Now, there's more, but that's the main point. They're talking about like the money will go directly to bulk fuel suppliers, because you've got approximately 3,000 trucks expected or something. I mean, this is a long line, right? Like these are not 3,000 people; these are 3,000 of like semis. So it's a huge convoy, if you will. Now they say some of it will go to cover lodging, food, I think, and the rest of the money will be donated to a credible veterans organization. Why do you think this garnered the attention of the world at large? Are these numbers speaking of something?
We could ask that same question. Why did the Kyle Rittenhouse trial get so much attention? If you're familiar, compared to, I don't know how to pronounce this, the Maxwell trial. I'm not going to pronounce her first name because I don't know.
Ghislaine or something like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that seems like, no one was talking about it. No one was really covering it. It was very minuscule compared to the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. So, there might be some hidden agenda to what makes mainstream and what doesn't. But I think, like you said, is that like a lot of people got together, and, if so many people are there and so many people are complaining, then the news just has nothing to do but to cover, or else they're not going to be there where all the drama is happening, which I feel like the news is really after these days. So
it's an interesting thing because online on that Facebook group, there has been a lot of comparisons made that this is like the January 6th event, but for Canada. See what I'm saying?
Insurrection. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're not going to take over. They're afraid of it. The police is kind of concerned over that, over so many people coming in, but still, you could probably draw some parallels of people just getting sick in the country of, what the government is doing. And this is an interesting philosophical discussion, right? We come to a point where, like, if in the past the peasants didn't really know much about, economics or the like larger things than just your village. Today, we have a ton of educated people around the globe. Like whether you're, a regular guy like me who goes 9 to 5, or you're the president of this country, our knowledge level will probably be similar, right? Our experiences might be slightly different, but like in terms of knowledge, we're all the same. And so that's when you're like, can I like really trust my government? Because, it seems to me on an individual level, their decisions are causing a lot of havoc.
Yeah, especially when we have phones these days now, right? Where like so many times it happens where the government is saying one thing, or like a person is saying like, oh, this is what I've always said. This is what and before the days of all this access to information for the normal person, right? It's just like you'll believe him. You'll be like, all right, he's trustworthy. But now if you bring up a video side by side, him saying it and then him saying a different thing, then you're like, well, something's not adding up.
Right. You can compare and definitely. Access to information has propelled us forward. So where do we find ourselves as Christians in these kind of matters of protesting government overreach? What should be our commentary on this matter? What's your perspective?
So I have a long-winded explanation, but I'm going to try to make this short. One story that comes to mind is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but basically it's a story from the Bible. It's events that happened. And so there was this idol that everyone was bowing down to. And so at that point, they stood up and they're like, hey, this is against my faith. I'm not going to kneel. And so what ended up happening is then they were thrown in a pit of fire, basically. And so I'm not going to get into the story too much, but that was clearly a sign of protest. In the Bible and as a Christian, you have this example of protest. And obviously it was for their faith, right? Because it was completely against their faith. And so it might have been a different situation, but there are some circumstances where you do protest. In some circumstances, I can stand up. And I feel like that decision is up to the person. It's up to moral judgment, because I'm going to bring into example COVID, but it works with other things as well, where, at first we were told, all it is 2 weeks to slow the curve. And all of a sudden today it's vaccine mandates. And I don't know if you've heard, but recently there was legislature that Washington was going to talk about, and it was COVID camps, where basically if a social worker shows up to your house and if they see that you have COVID and if you're not compliant, they have the power to send you for 10 days to a camp, to this place where you are forced to quarantine, right? Wow. So it went from 2 weeks to slow the curve to this, and so if you know that potentially in the future, what's happening right now is going to infringe on your rights, is going to stop you from like even professing your faith, or, the government is going to have strict control over your religion or anything like that. And it all starts with something small. If you stand up at the point where it's right about to infringe on your faith or on your personal rights, or where you draw the line, standing up then is going to be a lot harder than standing up, for instance, when all they're asking you to do is to put on a mask, compared to them locking you up and sending you to some camp, which it didn't happen, right? But that was just my example. So I think it's ultimately up to the person.
Especially in the countries where peaceful protests are accepted, like a democratic country. And if we can do it peacefully and if we can do it for a good cause, then that's an individual decision that we should respect and think for ourselves, where we stand on that. As a result, this convoy already inspired another freedom convoy to Canberra. That's in Australia. According to Associated Press, the main convoys are scheduled to arrive today around noon, but already on Friday, vehicles blocked the roads in front of Parliament. And on Saturday morning, there were dozens of trucks gathered. A total of 2,700 trucks are expected.
So I'm confused. Is this Australia or is this Canada?
No, I'm talking about Canada now. Good point. So Freedom Convoy did ultimately become a demonstration against government overreach, with vaccine mandate as a starting point. There is something about truck drivers that is conservative, but also rebellious, traditional, and at the same time adventurous. They're always on the road, always away from home and yet always yearning for home. So observing the speed at which this event took over the interest of people, it once again reminds us that people at large, whether in Canada or here in the United States, are in need of something to lead them onwards. They need a cause. They need a ray of hope. But ultimately, I think we would all agree that they need a shepherd. They need a leader, one that will care and do what's best for them. And that's a job only Jesus can do. And as far as civic duty goes, we are to contribute, to support the efforts that bring about peace, economic prosperity, and social stability of a nation. All right, welcome to Lightning Round, where we get to take a look at the rest of the, I guess, top stories, about a dozen of them, where we offer a quick commentary. They're based, I guess, by categories. We'll begin with COVID-19. I'm sure you're excited about this one. According to all the charts, actually, you might be excited about this one because it's good news. According to all the charts and data, new COVID infections are declining in the U.S., a sign that Omicron wave has likely peaked because it was more infectious or contagious variant with milder symptoms that it ran through the country and the whole world. And I know that it's still affecting people. There were still deaths, serious cases. But as a result, much more people got sick, and that could be a good thing. That means that more people have developed immunity. In fact, that's what scientists are saying right now, is that it's a good thing. Do you think, Paul, we could have developed immunity faster without all the COVID closures of 2020? As a scientist,
as a scientist, I got my PhD in the study of pandemics and immune diseases. Yep. No, so I don't know. I personally, my opinion, I would say I think so, because like if you're closed off, it just. When you're a kid and you run around and like, I don't know about you, but I remember like climbing around in dirt, climbing around, getting poked by different things, and you were fine because you were used to it. Yeah. Because you were always out and about. But then when you're inside all the time and then you go out and you do face a virus, I don't know. I feel like it would be more harmful.
Fully sterile environment just does not sound healthy. So here's an interesting article from Daily Wire. The Swedish government announced Thursday that it would not be recommending COVID-19 vaccines for children ages 5 through 11 because there is not sufficient evidence that the benefits of the jabs outweigh the risk of infection, according to the county's health agency. Their reasons, well, because of the issues that they're aware of and relatively low risk of kids getting seriously ill. And when I read that, I was going to say that this is a country that cares for the well-being of the future generations. But as you know, we've covered some stories from Sweden, and they actually are considered one of the world's most secular nations. Actually, I think you were on the show when we covered the Church of Sweden last year. They wrote an open letter to the transgender community, proclaiming that it was also transgender, meaning the church was transgender.
I don't know if I was on the show, but I do remember that story. Yeah. I remember it stuck out to me.
So, good reasoning in one area and then careening off the cliff in the other.
Well, in our own country, at least 7 school boards have sued Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin over his decision to end the Commonwealth's mask mandate in public school.
They were saying there's just not enough evidence, to continue having children wear masks in school, especially that most of them come in, you check for symptoms, plus masks don't work. They have them, below their nose. And so you got Sweden, and then what do you have in the United States? Yeah.
So I actually saw a picture of someone standing in, I believe it was like sub-zero weather, where like basically whenever you breathe out, you could see the air that you're breathing out because it's cold. So this person's standing and he's breathing normally, and you could see the air, and then he puts on a mask and he does the same breathing, and you can see that it doesn't come out the front, but it still comes out the sides, comes up. And so he's just standing there in this cloud of fog of his own smoke that's like going all around like his body. So in a sense that like, it doesn't come out the front, but the air still leaves. So like masks don't really help anything.
Especially for these kids being in a closed space for, 8 hours a day, like it's going to get all mixed.
So as you know, the government's mandate for large businesses with 100 or more employees was blocked by the Supreme Court I think just a couple weeks ago, right? Mm-hmm. It's formally withdrawn by the Labor Department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or better known as OSHA.
And it turns out like there's actually a whole list of corporations that decided that they're still going to enforce vaccination policy. Big corporations who said they're going to require vaccinations in order for people to return back to work, including those who are like expecting people who are working remotely right now to return to the office, they would need to be vaccinated.
Yep.
To me, that's just weird because you have the court saying one thing, and then I guess corporations can dictate what happens in the workplace. I just don't know if they can make it a prerequisite for actually working for them.
So actually, it's funny that you pointed that out, but the company I work for, so I was talking with some HR people, and they said that it's actually a requirement. It still is a requirement for people to be vaccinated in order to gain employment in the company. It's just weird because it seems like if the Supreme Court shuts it down, then all of a sudden they're not listening to the Supreme Court. But as soon as Biden says that, like, hey, in 3 or 4 weeks, I'm going to be implementing this mandate, and all of them comply within the next 2 days, all of them start. So it's like, where's that logic and where's that reasoning? It's kind of confusing.
All right, in the government news, 27 House of Representative members have signed a letter urging House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat from California, and a Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, to bring forward legislation that would ban members of Congress from owning or trading stocks, according to Axios. Now, it was apparently signed by 25 Democrats and 2 Republicans. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think this is very, very long overdue. I feel like if you're in a position of power where you can like mandate certain rules and certain laws that would benefit some companies while take away from others, you shouldn't be able to invest in their stock. I know there's even in certain companies, if you use a certain part of so if you work for a company and you are influencing certain parts and actions of the company, you're not allowed to personally buy or sell stock because then that's like insider trading. So why is that not the same with members of Congress and the government? Yeah.
Who have a much better insight than all of us before things happen. Yeah. How do you view firearms? Are they dangerous, necessary, or neutral, Paul?
It's a very complicated question. I think in some cases they are necessary. Right. In some cases they are justified.
The reason I'm bringing this up, in California, San Jose now is the first city in the nation to mandate gun owners to have liability insurance and pay an annual fee in effort to curb gun violence. Right? That's according to San Jose Spotlight. So let's think this over. Does it even make sense, right? Like, you would now have to insure so many other weapons or things, right? And it's like, if a gun is the issue, then where does the personal responsibility come in?
Well, it does make sense if all gun owners had their guns registered. But the thing is the things that aren't pointed out is the fact that most of the guns that are used to kill people and used in violence are not registered. Their serial numbers are taken off. And many times, I watch cop shows and they're like, oh yeah, unregistered gun illegally owned. And this person went and killed 2 people, So what about those people are the real people that are causing the gun violence?
So on Tuesday, council members voted 10-1 to approve the gun control rules requiring San Jose residents who own guns to pay an annual fee of $25 per household and purchase gun insurance that specifically covers losses or damages resulting from, quote, any negligent or accidental use of firearm in 6 months, according to the ordinance.
Here's probably part of the reason why. It's with roughly, I think, 50,000 to 55,000 San Jose households that are gun owners. The annual fee is expected to bring in about $1.3 million a year. I mean, with everything, in the end, it all comes down to money.
I was going to say, cue the registered ka-ching sound.
Yeah.
And a text message came in. All right, let's talk about chips. What are your favorite chips?
Yeah. I like CPUs. I like...
You're taking it straight there. Okay.
Well, what are my favorite chips? I'd probably have to say Doritos.
I like straight up potato chips. Anyways, we apparently had a dip in chips, electronic chips, that is. So according to Washington Post, manufacturers and other buyers of computer chips had less than 5 days' supply of some of the chips on hand late last year, leaving them vulnerable to any disruption in deliveries. The Commerce Department reported Tuesday as it pushed Congress to endorse federal aid for chip makers. I actually was at Best Buy trying to buy a laser printer, I think last week, and they were completely out of stock, including online. It says out of stock nationwide, including online. Now, you can still get them on Amazon. Yeah, but I just thought it was unusual. So what this means is, again, according to Washington Post, it means that the disruption overseas, which might shut down a semiconductor plant for 2 to 3 weeks has a potential to disable a manufacturing facility and furlough workers in the United States if that facility only has 3 to 5 days of inventory left. It looks like it's not going away for the next 6 months, this whole shortage problem. And that affects mainly older type of chips. And car industry, as you've seen, has been kind of struggling with that for a while.
I know we've been taking it for a fact, that like, oh, there's shortages everywhere. But why? Like, I feel like it was blamed on the Suez Canal.
Right.
Now that's resolved. So what is actually causing these shortages?
It almost seems like it's a domino effect from all the government closures that we had in 2020. I'm telling you, it's like those 3 months really just hurt the whole economy going forward. So we come from a Slavic background where on any given service you get to hear 3 sermons. Again, that's not counting like the little mini introduction sermons that we have at the end or in the beginning. So what do you prefer? 1 sermon, a long one, a short one, 3 like what do you prefer?
I prefer 2 sermons, one in the beginning, like a very short, like 10-minute one, short introduction, something like that. And then one main one, right, that is led by the pastor, which is like 45 minutes, that's well thought out, PowerPoint presentation, music to back up the rise and fall of like emotions during the sermon. It's just
okay.
Clearly. But yeah, I think 45 minutes of like one main sermon, I think that's a good time.
Well, according to Christian Headlines, the poll by Gray Matter Research and Infinity Concepts found that 85% of churchgoers, 85%, church-going evangelicals say that their pastor's sermon length is fine as it is. 8% prefer a longer length, 7% a shorter length, and they interviewed like 1,000 evangelicals. Ken Ham, founder and CEO of Answers in Genesis, commented on the findings. We need more solid, biblically driven teaching from God's Word to disciple and equip the next generation. He wrote, so many professing Christians know very little about what God's Word actually teaches. For example, another study that was just released found that half of U.S. Christians say casual sex between consenting adults is sometimes or always acceptable. He went on to say they need to be discipled in faith, encouraged to get into God's Word, and given the foundation for a biblical worldview so that they can properly view the world around them.
1,000 evangelicals doesn't seem like a lot. Some churches are like 20, 30,000. So if you take 1,000 evangelicals from one church and they have a main pastor sermon of 30 to 40 minutes, then obviously most of them are going to be happy. But yeah, I definitely feel like more have to be pulled on that.
I'm pretty sure this was like from across different churches, right? So it's like you're sampling, I guess. But overall, that's it's not like 65 or I don't know, 55, where it's like too close to being yes, no.
Yeah.
So
that's true. We're also creatures of habit, though. So if you walk in and like, if you don't see your 3 sermons for us, right, on a Sunday, you might feel a little bit off and weird at first until you get adjusted to it. So maybe that has something to play. But Ken Ham's point, I think, is very spot on. Well said.
Here's an article from Daily Wire. Thousands of police officers from around the country filled snowy New York City streets outside St. Patrick's Cathedral on Friday to pay respects to fallen NYPD officer Jason Rivera. Now, Rivera, 22-year-old police officer, was killed while on duty last Friday. That's according to New York Post. This rookie cop, along with 27-year-old partner Wilbert Mora, was ambushed in Harlem while responding to a domestic disturbance call. It was also added later that Mora also died from his wound later in the day. Have you seen the pictures of the tribute of all these officers?
This is the first time, like, officially reading about this story. I'm going to go check in on it. I guess my thought on this is, like, it warrants, like, at times you see police officers arresting someone and they're very rough, it seems like, but they're doing that for a reason.
Yeah.
Because if they're not rough, someone might turn around, and just saw a video the other day of a cop trying to detain someone, and the guy slipped out and just beat the cop senseless, which is, they do it for a reason.
It's like this fragile balance between being kind of mean. It's like force upon force, right? Like, but you want to make sure that there's this balance is kept, otherwise it will go wrong. And so the level of grief, I mean, if you look at those pictures, right, there's just thousands of them. It's really a sight to see. But the level of grief was overwhelming. Officer Rivera apparently had an argument with his wife that morning, and so that added to the loss. And I'd like you to hear some of the clips from the speech by Officer Rivera's widow, Dominique Luziriaga.
We had an argument. You know, it's hard being a cop wife sometimes. It's hard being patient when plans were canceled, or we would go days without seeing each other, or when you had to write a report that would take forever because you had to vouch for so many things. So you did OT. Or when you had a bad day at work because an EDP drove you nuts. But you always reminded me that it was going to be all right. We were going to get through it. This Friday we were arguing because I didn't want you to use your job phone while we were together. You were so mad that you took your LeBron jersey down, gave me your chain, and put the lotions I gave you for your ashy hands in the bag and said, "Here, take them." We left your apartment, and because I didn't want to continue to argue, I ordered an Uber. You asked me if you are sure that you don't want me to take you home. It might be the last ride I give you. I said no, and that was probably the biggest mistake I ever made.
It was tough to hear, like, you know, the widow. But I think it's a tough reminder for all of us to, you know, cherish those around us, because you never know, you know, like right. The last conflict, the last fight you have might be the last time you talk to a person. So it definitely will put you in a different perspective mentally.
And as hard as it is to go back and try to mend, you know, after a conflict, you know, kind of try to change things up, it's probably not as hard as losing someone.
Yep. So from one tragedy to another tragedy, a Pittsburgh bridge collapses, and it leaves 4 hospitalized and 10 injured at Frick Park early Friday morning. So the injured were transported to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. First responders reported to the scene and nearly 150 feet to help passengers from a dangling bus, while others formed a human chain to help rescuers with the effort. You know, it's just definitely a feat of effort to rescue, and it's a scary position to be in. You know, it's good to hear that there was non-life-threatening injuries. So
Biden was already planning to visit the place, and, you know, he had an opportunity to talk about infrastructure, about his $1 trillion infrastructure bill, and how that's, he was standing in the backdrop was this broken bridge.
Isn't Pittsburgh known, one of the things that it's known for is the city of bridges?
Really?
So if that's how all the bridges are built, then then it's going to be unfortunate.
How did you handle the snowstorm that we had a while back?
I actually enjoyed it because right before, I think 2 to 3 weeks, so I have a all-wheel drive car, right? So it's always all-wheel drive. It's a Jeep Grand Cherokee. And then I bought new wheels 2 to 3 weeks before, so I really enjoyed it. I was drifting and everything. I mean, if my mom's listening, no, I wasn't drifting. I was just driving normal.
I was going to say, it was hard to commute, but
it was really hard to commute from my bedroom to my office. Is difficult.
All right. Well, beginning yesterday, actually, a blizzard warning was in effect for 55 million people, approximately, from coastal Virginia to eastern Maine, and I think all the way, and it's past New York as well, because a historic winter storm was about to slam the mid-Atlantic and northeast. I know that at the time when I was writing this earlier this morning, it was snowing the Long Island, or on the Long Island as we speak, like snowing in badly. Some places expect up to 30 inches of snow.
I mean, I was joking about it earlier, but I truly hope that, like, you know, no one crashes, because when the snowstorm was here, there was, you know, a bunch of cars, even trucks and SUVs, like on the highway. They were like in the ditches and everything. So it's very scary, you know. So if people don't know, they're not used to driving in snow, then it's, you know, a lot of people get injured. So I really hope that no one gets injured.
What do you think of ads?
Like
advertisements.
Advertisements. It depends on the ad, but I feel like recently they've been getting worse and worse. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the more left-leaning, like, jokes or political agenda. Seemingly everything is like politicized. That I really think ads have just, I hate washing them.
Well, apparently according to this article, more and more brands are giving their customers heads up and a chance to opt out of marketing emails ahead of holidays like Valentine's Day. They're saying they were in fact mentioning that advertisements and promotions around holidays, particularly ones that celebrate relationships, can cause anxiety and depression, and that we're bombarded with all of these ads. They're saying that we went from being exposed to 500 ads a day in 1970s to around 5,000 a day now. That's a huge increase, huh? But this is like specifically in relation to Valentine's Day. And I think another, I don't know if it was this article, but they were talking about like Mother's Day, Father's Day. So like if you don't have a father, right? It would be really bad timing if you received an ad on Father's Day, about Father's Day.
I could actually stand behind this effort. I think definitely like if you don't have a father and your father just died recently and you keep getting Father's Day reminders, you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? Yeah.
So maybe soon they'll keep track of our personal preferences and what we celebrate and what we don't, and that might be a good thing.
So in tech news, the United Arab Emirates has banned the flying of drones in the country for fun or recreation because Yemen's Houthi rebels, I hope I pronounced that right, claimed a fatal drone attack. I think it was on an oil facility and a major airport in the country, and this was done with drones.
Yeah, apparently now drone flyers will face legal liabilities if caught flying them, which is ridiculous if you think about it. Because this is not just, like the DJI drones, let's say, with cameras, the bigger one. This is all drones, essentially.
So it seems like the rare drone missile strike in the capital of Abu Dhabi, it blew up several fuel tankers and killed 3 people last week, which I'm all for drone flying, but I do think if it poses a big threat like that, I feel like in the future they're going to be a much bigger problem, especially as like the tech increases. And now anyone can go spy on someone. Anyone can go like if you attach a gun to there somehow, like it's very scary.
It could get scary. I can agree. You would think that with the increase of technology, they would, increase, like have better patrolling. For example, banning cars from the streets just because they cause accidents is not a good, But then again, cars are essential, drones are not.
Yeah, but maybe you could just have I think hopefully what they're doing is like they're banning them now, but then later on they're going to come out with like specific rules and regulations how drones can be built and constructed and like change it in the future.
That's a good one. Space news. All right, we're moving on to space news. We're almost at the end. Do space stories annoy you, or do they pique your interest, Paul?
It depends on the space story. Okay. I feel like all of them are like there's always like a new rocket launched into space, a new something is headed for the moon. Where you're like, I feel like there's so much of them. I don't keep track of them personally. I'm like, wait, I thought didn't this just happen a month ago? And then someone
what's the difference between this rocket
and
the next one? Yeah, I know. I for some reason I find it fascinating because it's outside of our planet, like it's expanding like the limits of what we thought was possible. So with this, you're gonna have to bear with me through these few. I got a few actually, and then you're gonna be sharing a last one. Toyota.
If you hear a snoring sound, it's not me. I promise.
All right. So apparently Toyota is working with Japan's space agency to develop a lunar cruiser. Now this is interesting because it pays homage to the Toyota Land Cruiser. Get it? Lunar cruiser, Land Cruiser, to the sport utility vehicle that Toyota already has. So there's now going to be a space version of it. Not version, it's going to look totally different. But so the vehicle is based on the idea that people eat, work, sleep, and communicate with others safely in cars, and the same can be done in outer space, said Takao Sato, who heads the Lunar Cruiser project at Toyota Motor Corp. And then here's another one. So as if we don't have enough craters on the moon, SpaceX will be getting to the moon a bit more than a month from now, far earlier than expected, but it's all by accident, and the cause is a bit of a mess, according to New York Times. It's because the original plan of landing on the moon is still years away, like to land actual people on the moon. But what's happening is a 4-ton piece of a rocket that hasn't been heard from since it's launched an American satellite called Discover 7 years ago. It will be basically crashing into the moon. And they say it could make up to 65-foot crater on the far side of the moon. Exciting, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's on a collision course and nothing can be done. It's just going to crash into the moon.
Something like that. Yeah. And it's going to, we're now making a crater on the moon.
In other space news, so traveling into space is something that many people dream of. I dream of it. I'm sure you do, Alex, right, with the amount of space stories that you have.
One day.
And it almost became a reality for one man. Airline pilot Kyle Hipchin, he's 43 from Florida. He won a raffle ticket to be part of Inspiration 4 cruise on the new SpaceX flight. But at 5'10" weighing 330 pounds, he exceeded SpaceX's 250-pound limit. So he had to give his raffle to his roommate from Everett, Washington, which is devastating. Man, if you win a raffle like that and you have to give it away because of your weight, man, I would try to personally lose weight up to the point of launch or something like that. And
it makes sense. Listen, it's going to take a bit of time, but if you won the space, you could probably even get sponsors. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You could be you're in the news already because you won the raffle, and you could say, I want to make that limit. I'm 330. I want to drop down to 240.
He could have just opened up a GoFundMe, start a YouTube channel, be like, hey, my road to 240, and then please sponsor me for this. Totally. If it was actually his dream, then he could totally do it.
My. And the last one for today is, about Olympics. It's a week from today. In 6 days, they're opening up. And it's going to be in China. So that's going to be exciting. The U.S. Olympians that are going over there were asked to take burner phones because there's a possibility you're not coming back with that phone. And also to keep in mind that, everything's going to be monitored. There's going to be a ton of testing. There's a possibility that some will not participate because they will have, some kind of symptom. And then they have to quarantine for 14 days. So it's just going to be a really interesting... think about it. It's China.
I'm calling it right now. China's going to win this Olympics. It's going to get first place because all of the other teams mysteriously all got COVID or something like that and were able to participate.
Can you imagine? Yeah. I think it's going to be a fun one to watch. Well, that's all for the lightning stories for today. And now let's get to our last one that Paul prepared for us.
So the story I'm going to be covering today is actually going to be on the Russia/Ukraine/America/NATO conflict. I know this was recently covered. I think it was if you're an avid listener of the show, you would know this too, that in November of 2021, Alex and Vadim covered this story where, they talked about the ins and outs. And I feel like, Alex, I was listening to it recently. You did a really good job of giving the background information on Ukraine and Crimea and this whole and this whole conflict and where it began. So I definitely think I'm not going to be covering the background, but if you, the listener, are interested, for sure that would be a good. I think it was end of November 29th, that episode, 2021.
Yep. Episode 4.
I would definitely, episode 4 of season 2. Definitely good to listen to. But yeah, so basically what I'm going to try to do is I have 2 stories here from none other than the most trustworthy news as CNN. So I have 2 articles from CNN. And it kind of, so one, I found that it kind of, I'm going to take a blurb and it covers Russia's side and what they're saying. And I'm going to take another one and it covers the America-Ukraine side of this conflict just to, make sure that we have an unbiased unbiased kind of story. So the first story is CNN covering Russia's side of the conflict. So and I'm reading a quote. In spite of the ratcheting warnings of a pending war in Ukraine, the Kremlin has signaled that diplomatic discussions between Russia and the West will press on, at least for now. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov reiterated on Friday that Moscow did not want war with Ukraine, cooling talk of conflict a day after U.S. President Joe Biden said that Russia could be poised to invade Ukraine in February. If it's up to the Russian Federation, there will be no war. We don't want a war, Lavrov said. In an interview with Russian radio stations, Lavrov said that the United States' response to Russian security demands contained some grains of reason, a small ray of hope that diplomatic compromise could be reached. But the Kremlin has indicated that a wider agreement is unlikely, given that one of Russia's primary demands, a halt to NATO expansion, has been firmly off the table. So that was Russia's side.
Right.
We see the Russian foreign minister saying that, it doesn't want war. But it has this kind of agreement where it has some terms. And one of the terms is for the NATO expansion to stop and not get into Ukraine,
right,
basically.
Which Ukraine, in its turn, they do want to go, right?
Yes, yeah.
They want to continue going towards the European Union. And for Russia, that means having, on their doorsteps, what is it called? Allied forces or whatever, because I have in America
exactly,
right there. Yeah.
So this is another story from CNN, and this is the America-Ukraine perspective kind of that's being reiterated here. So United States Ambassador to Moscow, John Sullivan, says, despite repeated public assurances from Russian officials that they do not want to further invade Ukraine, the facts on the ground tell a much different story, and later on it points out that there's more than 100,000 Russian troops at the Ukrainian border. It's extraordinary. Basically, this ambassador is saying that Russia can attack at any moment, and this would be devastating to Ukraine. This is like, it's far bigger than a military exercise. You don't have 100,000 troops waiting by just to practice something. This is clearly them either preparing or defending, doing something. And so I feel like U.S. is on the United States is on edge, Ukraine is on edge, and we know that there was, I think, the last story I read said 8,500 troops were NATO troops and American troops were in the bordering countries around around Ukraine, basically ready to deploy, ready to stop Russia if it comes to that. So, obviously this is a difficult conflict, especially like for you, for me and you, knowing that, I don't know about you, but I have family both in Russia and Ukraine, so obviously I don't want this war to happen, and it's just so tense. There's definitely different sides to the story. What do you think about all this? I know it's been a couple months, but
yeah, what's interesting, you're part of the same. So we're part of a chat, right, of like the ministers of the state, coming from a Slavic background. Again, there's a bunch of Slavic leaders on this chat, and some of them are Russian, some of them are Ukrainian. It was interesting to see that tension even got in there, right? Like for a bit. It simmered down, but the tension got in there. And so, yes, it is an issue apparently of contention at times between Russians and Ukrainians. I look at it, first of all, you're probably one of the most, I want to compliment you on chess. You're one of the greatest chess players that I have in my actual real life. And so you would relate to this. I feel like it is a game of chess essentially for many nations right now. There's not a lot of like real, it's literally a lot of scaring and bluffing and moving troops here and, hyping up the media from one side and then hyping up the media from another. I think that's what's going on. It's just a big old chess game on a world scale that for now at least is peaceful, but it is coming dangerously close to like a possibility of something happening. I think we should just keep an eye on it, pray for Ukraine, hope that this, because, even back in the days when the conflict in Crimea started, that was kind of unexpected, but it happened. Nobody expected it, but boom, now, here we have the consequences many years later. So big old chess game is what I think it is.
A chess game with real consequences though, right? Not just
right.
Not just losing a game, but then this is actually like war, and there's, you definitely don't want to see it, because then there's death. And when it comes to that, it's just, you hate to see it. You definitely don't want it to get to that. But I agree. It does remind me of a chess game. And actually, I had this example that when I was thinking about Russia's side and America's side, thinking about the two different sides, obviously trying to stay unbiased because, for me, it's a personal issue. I have family in Russia, family in Ukraine. So definitely seeing the tensions, rise. I think we should, like you mentioned, that chat that we're on, it's just to make sure that we're not looking at it out of a perspective of anger, but like looking at it in a biased way. And like you mentioned, once we do that, we kind of realize that it is just a bunch of games being played. And so, a game that comes to mind is Risk. I don't know, have you ever played Risk?
No.
Risk is basically you start out with certain you start out with a piece of land on a world. So it's a map of the world, right? And you start out with an area, and then you basically battle other people trying to take over the whole world. So there's a lot of chance in that game. But so one point comes to mind of a time I was playing Risk. And so I remember I had North America. I had the borders fortified, everything, you know, I was feeling good. And so a buddy of mine that I made a compromise with, so he had South America, Africa, but there's this other player who owned Europe, Russia, like the whole Asia. And so he was clearly stronger than both of us. So we're like, hey, we're going to get into this deal, like this friendly deal. So let's attack him, because if he attacks us, there's no way we're going to win. Right. So we started attacking, you know, turn after turn. We're going through this. And then all of a sudden I noticed that in South America, my friend who I have an alliance with, he's all of a sudden building up troops. And then, you know, at one point I looked and I'm like, man, he has more troops in South America than he does attacking Europe. And so that immediately like put questions in my mind. I'm like, what is he doing? You know, he's my friend, but is he really my friend? Why is there so many troops there? And then my reaction to that was obvious. And it was like, okay, well then I'm going to put troops in, you know, in Southern America to protect myself in case he does attack. So although it is very like, you know, these international politics, they're much different than a board game, you know, real consequences, real war, and it's scary, but it's kind of similar. You know, you see from Russia's perspective, they're looking and all of a sudden one of the biggest superpowers is coming in, and with NATO, they're putting in different troops everywhere, you know? And so what would you do in your situation? If you're thinking about it, you're like, well, I would defend too. I would put troops out just in case something does happen. Now, the other way around, from America's perspective, from Ukraine's perspective, you know, Russia is a big bully. You know, he attacked other countries previously. Are they going to attack now? So now you're fortifying in case, you know, there is that threat. So a bunch of games, a bunch of, like you said, chess game. But yeah, so like I read in the stories above, you know, there's clearly a side that America's communicating, Ukraine's communicating, Russia's communicating, but is that really what they're thinking and what's going to happen? You know, clearly there's many perspectives here. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm looking at the whole landscape, like the media scape, if you will, how it developed over the weekend. And you have America playing a big part in it. I guess the whole West is sort of trying to use their levers of control in this, you know, big game. For example, U.S. said on Monday that, you know, that they're going to be withdrawing or reducing their staff levels at the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. And even though it was to do with like staff shortage, they dismissed it on a secondary cause. But see, it causes a panic in Kyiv, because then they're like, all right, is something going on bigger than what we're expecting? Because we know we have Russian troops up there. And I actually heard Ukrainian President Zelensky speak about that, you know, the West is playing a big scare game, which is probably unnecessary. And what they're forgetting is that Ukraine is an actual country that has actual people, you know, like real people there, and it affects them in a real way. It puts the country on alert. It puts unnecessary fear. And the other part of it is that on Tuesday, U.S. troops were on high alert because there came an order. Came on Monday an order from U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. He was planning to place 8,500 troops on high alert to potentially back up NATO forces, you know, in case of Russia invasion. Yeah. So now we're talking about like real, you know, actions or decisions. You know, consider also the 200,000 pounds of military aid to Ukraine that's been sent, and all of that just plays into this fear. And again, the news media outlets, they spin these stories because we want to talk about Russia invading Russia, this big country, right? Mm-hmm. And Russia does have a weird bend in the whole idea of just taking over the world, country by country. I don't know, probably from the Tsarist era. So there's that. It's just, you know, I was talking to I actually got to reconnect with my actual father, biological father from Ukraine. He called me on my birthday, which he started doing in the recent years. And then he also called me to congratulate my boys, which were January 24th this past week. And so I briefly asked him about the situation in Ukraine. And even his response was very biased and sort of one-sided. Like most of them are against Zelensky as a president. They are sick of corruption, and that they think the whole Russia thing is just the scare that the West is using. That was their perspective.
Wow.
They're like, it depends which network you watch, basically. You watch the Russian networks, you're going to hear that, Ukraine needs help. And you're going to watch the Ukrainian networks and you're going to see that Russia is the big enemy. And so it's like you said, it's important not to take it so serious that your closest people to you become your enemies,
That's a very good point. Like where you mentioned, like whichever country's news station you listen to, that's the perspective you're going to get. And that's really interesting because I guess all this international politics with all these countries reminds me of like, I don't know if you've ever had this, but if someone comes asking you for a favor, like, hey, can you drive and do this? Or can you go and do something? And so at times I catch myself having this thought process where I'm like, I really don't want to do this. And so, but I'm going to say that I have homework or I have something to study for, or I have something to do. Right. And so once I say that, realistically, what I'm saying, and this is shameful to me, and I'm trying to stop this in my life. I'm not trying to brag about
confession
this.
Time.
What I'm saying is like, hey, I have homework, even though full well I know I'm not saying no because of the homework, but that is just a sub reason, and my real feelings and what I'm really doing is hidden. And so what I'm trying to lead to is that, Russia is saying that, hey, we want to, there's these troops, NATO, or we're just seeking for a compromise. We don't want America in there because they might attack us, right? In Ukraine because they might attack us. Who knows? What if Russia's just saying that and they all know that they want to take over Ukraine? America's saying, hey, Ukraine needs help. Ukraine is this, Russia's going to attack and it's just a huge war situation. Who knows? What if America doesn't actually care about Ukraine and actually wants that base there, those NATO troops there, so that when the time comes, they can attack Russia. So it's all just intermixed. There's so many different viewpoints. And, I would definitely say, like, sticking to one country like America and listening to the politics here, it's confusing enough. Now you add 3 different countries and all of a sudden there's so many lies, so many things that you have to like, kind of like so much ambiguity that you have to look through. But I think you said a very, very good point. And, to kind of lead to a conclusion is that we have to make sure that we don't, like, especially with our friends and family, that we don't have these, we have these angry emotions, which I think come from COVID and this pandemic where we're so on edge, where we're so stressed, where all these mandates and people don't know how to react. There's these, truck drivers in Canada that are driving and protesting, and we're in all these confused emotions, and all of a sudden this conflict comes and we deal with anger, and that's not what we want to do, because realistically, if we're so far away and we're just getting angry at this situation to get angry and frustrated, then there's no point. But if we actually want to help, like you said, we could pray. We could pray for Ukraine, pray for Russia, because I'm sure none of us want this war to happen. If we, know people in Ukraine that are getting attacked, or people that are, some situations help, then let's get together. Let's send packages. Let's do something about it. Let's actually try to help out instead of just getting angry for the purpose of getting angry. And that's just the point that I wanted to make, because if you look at all these stories, depending on what one you pick, you're either going to be pick one side and frustrated at the other, or vice versa.
Well, that's all for the stories for this week. We are so glad you've joined us for another episode of Life Ring. Please consider following us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube. Just type in Life Ring Podcast. Also consider sharing it with a friend or a family member that would benefit from a weekly overview of the current events from a conservative and Christian perspective. And as always, we would like to remind you that there is no better news on any given day than the good news of Jesus Christ. He died for the sins of the world so that everyone who comes to him would be saved. We encourage you to seek him if you haven't already. Thank you for listening to Life Ring, and we'll see you next week.